kawaii.
Hello friends, my name is Claire and today we're going to talk about how I studied to pass the NASM CPT exam. I just took and passed my exam last month on my first try and I'm going to tell you exactly how I did it. Let's get into it. My first tip is to get through as much of the content as you can before the 2-week mark. And by the 2-week mark, I mean 2 weeks prior to your scheduled exam date. I would read through the lessons and take notes. Taking notes really helped to further my understanding of the content. I personally made it through 85% of the content and I completed it in order. I ended up going from section 1 to section 5 and then skimming through section 6. If I were to go back and do it differently, I would definitely start at section 2 and go through to section 6 and then revisit section 1 at the end. And the reason for this is because section 6 actually makes up 20% of your exam, so it's actually the second highest weighted category on the exam. Whereas section 1 is actually the smallest section and it's mostly common sense. So I would definitely save that for the last and make sure to prioritize getting through section 6. When I studied, I started in April and I had made it through most of the content by June. My mistake was that I ended up stopping studying completely because I changed jobs, and then I realized in October, oh my gosh, my exam is about to expire, so I went back and I started studying again 2 weeks before my exam. I definitely recommend taking all the quizzes that are at the end of the lessons and at the end of the chapters. Those really help me, and I would try to keep your quiz average high, at least 80%. My quiz average was 91%, and those questions are very similar to what you'll see on the exam, so make sure you do them. I would try and understand as much as you can about muscle anatomy and the function of the muscles. This can really help when you get an assessment question that you're not familiar with or a question about a specific exercise you're not familiar with. Alright, so my second tip is to do the practice exams that are provided by NASM. I did the practice exam 7 times throughout my studying. It regenerates new questions every time, so it's definitely recommended to take it more than once. My highest grade was an 85% and my lowest was a 71%, and that was my first attempt after months of not studying. The practice exam provided by NASM is 100 questions, which is actually 20 less than the real exam, but it's the same number that's scored on the real exam. So the actual exam is going to include 20 research questions that are used to help create future versions of the exam. They're not going to count towards your score. However, you do still have to answer them, and they are going to take up part of your time. So that is something to consider. The actual exam is 120 minutes or 2 hours, and the practice exam is the same length. However, you need to consider that if you're taking the entire time to do the practice exam, remember you're going to have to answer an additional 20 questions on the real exam. So make sure you're able to answer all the questions within the time limit. The practice exam is going to pull material from all the sections, so you'll get a good spread of the material. It's not going to just be focused in one section. It's going to show you exactly what you got wrong, as well as the correct answer. And this is super helpful for you to study because you don't have to go searching for what the correct answer is. It's right there for you. So you can go back and you can see exactly what you got wrong, what the correct answer is, and you can use that to study and get it right the next time. Alright, so my third tip is to read the study guides, but wait until you've done the practice exam at least once. So there's one study guide at the end of every section, and NASM also offers an overall study guide for all of the content. The weak sections that you have from your practice exam, that's the study guides you need to print, read, and highlight anything you need to focus on. Pay attention to which sections make up the most content of the exam, and combine that knowledge along with which sections you're weak in to prioritize your studying. So, from the most to the least, exercise technique and training instruction, or section 5, is going to make up 24% of the exam. So that is the most questions of the exam from that section. Next, program design. Section 6 is going to make up 20% of your exam. Assessment. Section 4 is 16% of your exam. Basic and applied sciences and nutritional concepts is section 3, and that's 15%. Client relations and behavioral coaching, or section 2, is also 15%. And then professional development and responsibility, section 1, is only 10%. Again, that's why I recommend saving section 1 for the end, because it's the smallest section and it's also mostly common sense, at least in my opinion. Okay, tip number 4 is a little bit weird. It's definitely not something I've heard in any other study video, but this is something that really helped me, and that's going through the glossary and making flashcards. Any unfamiliar term or even slightly unfamiliar term, make a flashcard. And a big helper is to make flashcards of opposing or very similar terms. That way you can review and drill and make sure you really understand the differences between similar terms or opposing terms. So for example, muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ. Very similar terms, they do similar things, however, they are not the same. Make sure you know the difference, and that will really help with your studying. All right, tip number 5, study every day. Now, I don't mean study every day for months. I'm talking 2 weeks before the exam, or if you really have to, 1 week before the exam. And if you only have 1 week before your exam, make sure that you're scheduling in tons of time to study, because this is not a small amount of information. This is a lot of material to cover, so make sure that you've got plenty of time to review everything. Carrying study materials with you is super, super helpful. Any physical materials you have, I would keep on you as much as you can, so that when you have downtime, you can quickly flip through some information. You can carry course materials. I had them on my phone, so I always had my textbook, all the podcasts, all the videos, all of that. I carried printed flashcards, or not printed, printed study guides, and then my handmade flashcards with me all the time. I also downloaded the Pocket Prep app, and I used that a ton just to do quick quizzes. I didn't pay for it personally, but if you have the time, if you're like 2 weeks out, it might be worth it to pay for it, just for the 2 weeks before the exam, and then you can cancel. And then watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, any way you can take in information, super helpful. So anytime I was in the car, going for a walk, doing like housework, something like that, I had a podcast on, I had a YouTube video on, I had something on so that I was taking in information. Even if I'm not fully absorbed in it, at least I have a little bit trickling in, is kind of my mindset. So I recommend finding study guide videos on YouTube. Some of them are absolutely incredibly well made, so I recommend looking for those. I also recommend the NASM podcast actually has a study guide series. I found it so incredibly helpful. Dr. Rick Ritchie does them, and he does an amazing job. So highly, highly recommend those. Again, the Pocket Prep app, I recommend that as well. If you have the time, I would pay for it. If you don't have the time, just get the free version and flip through it once a day if you can. There's a question of the day that you can answer. That's going to be a new question every day. The actual bank of questions is pretty small, so if you have the free version, you're probably going to get to all the questions after a few times of taking the test. So just be mindful of that. All right, tip number 6. This is my final tip, and it is memorize certain topics. Now, I personally absolutely hate memorization, but it is pretty important for this exam. So the first thing that you want to memorize, let me tell you, the bane of my existence, the overhead squat assessment. Do your best to memorize what muscle imbalances cause certain compensations. Overactive is typically going to mean that the muscle is remaining in a shortened position, where underactive is typically going to mean that it's a lengthened position. Something that helped me a lot was focusing on the function of the muscle, not how it's functioning in this movement, but the overall function of the muscle, and then trying to rationalize how that muscle is causing the compensation. For example, if you think about your lats, what do? They assist in a pull up and they assist in a lat pull down. So anything that they're doing is pulling the arms down. So that's the job of the lats. So when I'm thinking about, okay, the overhead squat assessment, you're holding your arms above your head. And if your compensation is that your arms are pulling down, what's pulling them down? Well, one of the options is the lats. And it helped me just remembering the lats are used to pull, and so they're pulling them down. I don't know if that really helps, but that helped me. And then some other things you need to memorize: calories per gram, so protein, carb, fat. I've also had it recommended to me that you memorize alcohol. I never saw in the NASM materials where they mentioned that. However, it's 7 calories per gram if you need it. And then setting up assessments and performing them, know the basics. if there's any like specific numbers, like the YMCA step test, the cadence, stuff like that, I believe it's 96 steps per minute, stuff like that, helpful to know, and I would memorize that if you were able to. If not, at least knowing the basics, how to set it up, how to perform it. That will really help make a difference on your exam, so when you get those assessment questions, you don't feel totally clueless. And trust me, there are assessment questions, because that is a large chunk of your exam. So, be familiar. Alright guys, if you made it to the end of this video, I have a challenge for you. Try tapping the like button, but only with your nose, not with your finger. Comment below if this video helped you, or if there's any questions that you have about the exam that I can help answer. I do recommend watching a lot more videos like this so that you can feel as confident as possible going into the exam, because you want to feel prepared when it comes time for that exam. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye!